Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to fix these screens. They're not torn or anything, but the corners are all broke. They're PVC type material and they just go bad over years. These are really old, so I'm going to reuse the aluminum and I'm going to replace the screen and the corners. This one's in particularly bad shape. The south side of the house gets more sun and it deteriorates the plastic a lot easier on this than the north side or the west or east side. So I'll show you how I fix that. This is how you fix bad corners on screens. Okay, so the tools I'm going to use is a needle nose, a small screwdriver, and a razor, or utility knife in this case. And I want to show you this before I start. The corners are all broke on this one. This one's disintegrated. It's pretty much gone. If you have some that have corners, try to take this apart without losing that. You want to be, it's a lot easier to pull these off if they're still intact. See how this one is like totally broken? I'm going to have to pull that with a screwdriver and needle nose to get that out, and it takes much longer. First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to get rid of this screen, and basically you take the spline off to do that. This one has all four corners broke, so I don't have to worry about it as much, but if you have some that are still intact, try to keep them intact before you start working on the project. And it's pretty easy to pull the spline out. You could do it by hand. I just got, since this one's all broken up, I don't have to worry about it. You just pull the spline out of there. And note on this, I have these little tabs on here, these black tabs, the little pull tabs, and they're connected on here. They're under the rubber. You put the tabs down, and then you put the screen over it, and then you put the spline. This one has a lot of dirt. See how the tab's on there? And it basically comes off. It might disintegrate, they're pretty old. Another one. Now when you do pull it out, there might be still some screen in there, like this one has some screen. Just pull it out with a screwdriver or with your fingers if you can. You want to get all that screen out of there. And I'm going to reuse the spline. There's no reason to not reuse it. It's still perfectly good. And this is the entire spline for the entire job, for that panel anyway. And you just keep pulling the screen off these things till you're done. Most likely the screens are in bad shape too. There's your four pieces there. Now you got to clean them with soap and water. Don't use any rough detergents or anything because you'll peel the paint off. They're so old. Same with the frames on the windows. If you use like anything that's pretty toxic kind of thing, like a 409 or something, you might pull the paint off these white aluminums. It's really easy to pull the paint off. So I clean it with soapy water, and if I can't get it off, I sand off the rough edges with light sandpaper. And here is the bag of corners. I got 50 of them. I think it cost me $15 on eBay. Now I'm going to warn you, these are a little bigger than the originals, so you might have to file them down to get them to fit right. It's going to be a very tight fit as far as the two that I did already. So I filed with a file the corners of these things. It files pretty easily. Now the next step is probably the hardest step, because you got to pull those plastic pieces that are stuck in there that are broke. And I use a flathead screwdriver to pry my way under there. You're going to get some bent aluminum a little bit, but it shouldn't be too bad. You could always bend it back. See how I bent that to the point where it actually You could see the indentation. Don't worry about that. It won't matter in the end. As soon as you can get a piece out, you can use your needle nose to pull it out. But I usually go around the entire piece and just make it a little bit wider with the screwdriver like that, so I can get the piece out of there. Now these new pieces, they cost I think $5 a piece at Lowe's. So if you have some that are in really bad shape, you can go to Lowe's and pick them up for $5. Or if you just want to do it, I think they're 84 inches. These are approximately 35 inches, the ones that I'm using. So I could get 2 out of 1 using a hacksaw. And then after a little bit of struggle, that's what your end will look like. It'll be all like jagged, but you got your piece out. That's what matters. See the broken piece? But it will be jagged, and then you just use your pliers, or your needle nose in this case, and flatten it back down. The edges really don't matter. You're going to paint this anyway at the end. So just try to get it as flat as possible, and you should be good. See how it looks now? It's not that bad. And I'm going to paint it anyway. So I just had a really tough one. If you really have problems with this, you might have to drill it out and then tap it on the ground to get it to come out. Like drill a hole, maybe put a wire in there and pull it out if they get really tough. Now you remember, you could buy these at Lowe's and they're pretty inexpensive. So see, here's what a bad one looks like, but it only took me a couple seconds. See how messed up it is? But that's no problem. You just take your needle nose and push it back down, and you wouldn't even know it's there when you put those plastic plugs in. So as you can see, this one's nice and square again. The edges are a little rough, but you won't even see that. So the way I cleaned mine originally is I put a bunch of car wash detergent in a bucket with water, and I dip them in there and keep them in there for a little while, and I flip them over because they're a little higher than the bucket, you know. And then I have this scrubby that I use for my car. It's like got texture, but it's not going to scratch the car, and I use that to clean these pieces. This one's like really dirty. It's going to be dirty on the bottom, actually. That's where all the dirt accumulates. And then I just scrub it. But scrubbing and using soap isn't going to be enough. And if you use like a more aggressive chemical, it'll take the paint off, which in a way is not that bad. But aluminum's really hard to paint, believe it or not. It looks like it's easy to paint, but it isn't. And originally I bought this paint from Home Depot. Screen enclosure touch-up paint. It's a screen tight. And I cleaned up my windows with a detergent that was really harsh, and then I cleaned it off, and I never really sanded it. And when I used that spray, a couple days later the paint was peeling off the window. I only did 2 windows, so it was no big deal. But I just got to let you know that sometimes you got to scrub this up with some sandpaper. So after I clean this, I'm going to scrub it up with sandpaper, and I'm going to use this instead. Rust-Oleum aluminum primer. And it's pretty expensive. It's $10 a can. And but I think that is specifically made for this. This stuff is like a patchwork job, and I would never recommend getting screen enclosure touch-up paint. It never seems to work right. But I got this paint, and it's only one color, aluminum primer, and it's in white. Now I don't know if I have to put a paint over the primer or not. You would think you would, but I emailed Rust-Oleum to ask them, and I'll find out. But I'm going to clean off this one now with my scrubby, and then I'm going to let them dry, and then we'll sand them lightly. I'll show you how I sand them. So what the problem is with just using soap and water is the dirt. This aluminum's been on the house for 30 years. So the dirt's been baked on there for 30 years. It's usually just the one piece. It's the bottom piece. So if you bought the newer metal, you could probably just use the newer metal for the bottom piece and get away with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand it after it dries off, and then that'll be a good acceptable surface for the primer to stick to, I think. And then after the primer, you can paint it. All right, I'm gonna wait this out now. Okay, I rinsed it off. I didn't dry it. I'm just gonna wet sand it with my palm sander here. It'll take off the surface muck and paint and give it a scratch surface for the primer to stick to. Alright, so I got all the gook and stuff off there. It's not exactly polished or anything, and there is still some grit on it. I could go a little bit longer on that, but I'm not really caring. You're not going to see this stuff for the most part. So I'll wash it down with some water and I'll let it dry, and then we'll put it together and we'll see if it fits in the frame. Okay, these are the corner brackets I bought. There's multiple kinds, it appears. And this one has like a little ledge on the outside, this little square box, so it's not flush. You can see there's a little bit of an indent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind some of that off so that it fits in the window better. I already had done a couple of these, and 2 of them I had to grind it off. I sanded it off. I also filed it off with my file. The file worked well, but it was slow. Now I'm going to use a grinder and see what happens. I got a lot of these. They were on eBay pretty cheap. And I probably knew that this was going to be a problem. But at the cost they were, I think 15 for 50 of them, it was too good a deal not to get them. Okay, we're going to give this grinder a shot. Alright, that was a lot easier than sanding it, I'll tell you that much. We're going to paint this so it doesn't matter. But the original and the grinded down version, it'll be a lot easier if you grind them down. Or you could buy the kind that is already grinded or not even have the plastic piece. I also took some of the edge off, so right here. I rounded it around a little bit so it fits better, quicker. I think that'll work fine. I'm going to grind 4 of these down and we'll see if we even need them. But that's the way I'm going to do it for now, and I'm going to use my grinder. And anytime you get to use your grinder, it's a good day. Don't you think? You got a grinder, you don't get to use it that much, but when you do use it, it works really well. Granted, I have a cheap one I can't stand, but one day I'll get a nice one. Now, for Ryobi or somebody wants to send me a battery operated one, I'll definitely review it, because I definitely need a new grinder. But this is working so well. I feel it took me a long time to sand and file the other one. Just be careful because it takes off a lot of material. So that should be good. It should fit really well. These are probably getting pretty dry. Let's give them a test fit. They only go in one way, so you can't screw it up. See, there's one. Now, usually, two are longer than the other 2, so you have to know which ones to put on here. You just push them in, and they work fine. Something like that. Most likely I'm not going to paint them together like this because it's easier to paint them in pieces. Unless you have like a tarp down or something, then you could probably paint them pretty good, I guess. Alright, so there's your piece right there put together. I'm going to put it in the window and see if it fits. Here's what my original ones look like. See how flat they are on top? And then this one had like a big old corner on it at one point where I shaved it down now, but it didn't have this extended piece here and on the side. So it was making it hard to put in. You could check yours and see if they look like this or like this. All right, this one definitely needed the corners cut down. It wouldn't fit with the corners probably in there. So grinding those pieces off worked well. I'm gonna wait for it to dry, then I'll try painting it. I'll spray it again lightly, and I'm not going to make sure I get the corners because the corners are a little different color than the actual aluminum. So I'm going to try to get the corners to look a lot like the aluminum. I'll be right back. So there it is. It's in the window itself. That one worked really well. As I said, it might be a little different per window. When you take these screens off, make sure that you have a tag on them to tell you which window it came from, because they could be slightly off. But that one worked really well. So I'm going to be putting the screen on it next. Okay, I bought this gray screen from Amazon. I think for 100 feet at 36 inches, it was $42. I got gray because I really don't want the screen to be black, because everything on the window was white and black just stands out. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure I'm going to be putting all these screens back on. I may do the back yard ones, but I'm not sure about the front, because I think it takes away some of the look of the house when you have screens. Especially in Florida, you really can't open the windows, it's too hot. But I am making every screen, I'm making 10 screens, and I'll put them in there. I'm getting my house painted too. And by the way, they don't paint the aluminum unless you want them to, and it costs a pretty decent amount of money for them to paint the aluminum. They really don't want to do it. So I got this gray screen instead of the black so that it doesn't appear as dark when you're on the street looking at the house. I don't really like that look of a black screen on the bottom and then there's no screen on the top. So the gray screen cost a little more. It was $42 compared to like $27 for the black on Amazon. And I'll put a link of this and everything I use in the description below. So after you get your frame all painted, you could put the frame on a hard surface like tile or something, because you're going to need to put some pressure on it. And then you take your clips. These are the clips that you use to put on the bottom so that you could pull tabs. It's like pull tabs, and basically you just put them back in like this. You could space them wherever you want them. Just make them pretty even. And the top of it, like on this one, it has a little clip. It's a little like pressure clip, and that's those pull tabs go on the other side, not on that side. So now I'll show you how I put my screen in. So you pull your screen out, you orient it so that you have as much of the screen on the edges as you can. And you try to make it as square as you can with the frame so that the squares on the screen are parallel to the frame, so that you have a consistent look. You don't really have to worry about that much. You can't tell, but I do that. And then you just cut off the extra side piece here, and we'll go ahead. And you just have it overlap and square, and that's what it should look like. So here I start on the corner next to the piece pull tab, and I just put the spline that I'm using back in, and I take a screwdriver, doesn't matter what size really, and I push the spline in to the edge. And you try to do as much as you can with that little screwdriver at first so that you get a tight fit in there. And then I have this roller here. I'll show you. I'll put a link in Amazon for it, and that's a plastic one from me. I used to use the metal one, but it broke, and I think this is better because it doesn't cut the screen. Sometimes the metal one would cut the edge of the screen, and I don't like that very much. So all you do is you apply pressure to that spline. Now the part that's going to be a problem is where these pull tabs are. It's not as wide, so you might have to open up that piece with the screwdriver to get it to fit better. And basically all you do, you have two sides on this spline. One has a groove and one has just a roller. And I found that they both work well at certain times. Like to get it started, sometimes I use the roller, and then I use the other side to really push it down into the slot. And sometimes I go back to the screwdriver, but very rarely. Now you want to apply pressure as close as you can to the bottom of the wheel. Sometimes I use both fingers, both hands to do this. And if you get into sometimes you get into a rhythm and it goes in really nice, and then sometimes you're fighting it. But you'll get it in. The only part I say is these tabs are a little hard to get it in, and you'll see if you'll know what I mean when you do it. It's not as wide with those tabs in there, so it's really hard to get it in. So I think sometimes you just got to stop and take your screwdriver and open up that chamber a little bit that the tabs are on. Just give it a little more space than normal. You could bend the aluminum with the screwdriver. Probably a bigger one would be better. That's almost in. A lot of pressure has to go on it to get it down. Well, that's as good as it's going to get. It's almost all in there. You'll notice that a little bubble kind of shows up, but you won't notice that later. So I'm just going to complete this whole side really quick. Okay, I got that side on. And normally what I would do is I would cut the spline on the corner and then go to the opposite side of the screen. So I started that way. I would do the one on the left. That seemed to be the easiest way for me, but people seem to be able to do it with one long spline and go around with never cutting this spline. And I kind of like that idea, but when I tried it the first time, it didn't work well. I'm going to give it another shot, and I'm going to fold this screen under the aluminum to get a tighter fit. So I'll give it a shot. Yeah, so to make it easier, I put the excess screen under the aluminum, and then when I put the spline in, I'm going to make sure I pull on this a little bit to get it as tight as I can. That way I don't cut the spline into 4 pieces or to at least 2 pieces, which I normally do. You could do either way, I guess. Now, if I got the second side on in one shot, it appears to be tight enough. If it isn't tight enough, you probably get 1 or 2 times where you can pull the spline out and do it again. After the third time, you're taking a chance that you're going to be cutting the screen, so be careful. It depends on how much pressure you put on the screen. But I'm going to do the third side now. Remember, in the beginning, I used the screwdriver to get the corner. Okay, as you're moving the spline down, it's good to have your fingers press some of it onto the left like I'm doing now, holding it tight. it helps to get that spline in if it has a straight piece to work with at the end. If it's all curled up, you're going to have a little bit harder time. It's best to keep it in the track and keep pressure on it, and also keep pressure on the screen so it's nice and tight. In the end, I had a little bit of extra, so I got to cut it, and I use the scissors for that. You're never putting it in as tight as they do from the factory, so you're going to wind up with a little extra. It didn't come out too bad considering how large this one is. I think there is some play in there. You could probably pull up some of it and make it tighter if you had to. Yeah, let me stretch this out a little bit. It's pretty tight except in a couple small areas. Where those pull tabs are, it doesn't get as tight. But it's acceptable. So when you're cutting, you use your utility knife and you put it against the wall inside, right on top of the black spline on the left side here, let's say, and you angle it down so that you're getting all that excess screen out of there. And yeah, just be careful because you could cut the screen you want to keep. But a sharp knife is always good. Something like that. But you go all the way down and do the same thing. So I completed it, and it came out really good. The side that you put the spline in is the other side. This is the side that's going to show outside. The tabs are going to be outside. And I did scratch the aluminum a little bit, but I could touch that up. It doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to see it. So that's how you put a screen back on back together again after you put the corners on.